Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in this lovely world on your own screen. Today we are, would you believe it, in the CRM conversation 296. And our topic is European data sovereignty, still a political fig leaf or concrete action, fiction, drama, and reality. And we invited Christian Knoll to be our guest and discuss with him and you, if you like, and participate in our distributed channels, some on LinkedIn, YouTube, and some channels on Facebook, where we have the group's opportunity that you can discuss with us. To introduce our guest from my end, Christian is the CEO of Spice CRM, which is a leading CRM solution provider based in Vienna, Austria. Christian has a wealth of experience in strategic planning, business development, CRM implementation. Under his leadership, Spice CRM has grown to become a trusted partner for business looking to optimize their customer relationship management processes. Christian is known for his customer-focused approach and active communication style, one of the reasons why he is with us, which have helped him build strong relationships with clients and stakeholders and a lot of partners, to say so. Fluent in both German and English and some Eastern European languages, as I learned recently, he is adapted at navigating the complexities of international business environments. In former roles, he was in the board of Kinamo, a sugar CRM partner, and earlier in several roles as SAP. There is the link to Thomas. He recently expanded his business in buying a new organization focusing on quality processes. So, Christian, welcome. And what have I forgotten and missed?
Nothing. Thank you for the nice welcoming words. And I hope the elaborate doesn't mean I'm the drama queen, since we talk about visionary and drama. So I think Thomas and I will figure out who is basically on the fiction and who's on the drama side. But to make that happen, I will focus on English.
Oscillating back and forth.
Yes, I will make it happen. Thanks for the great intro. The very interesting topic, especially in times like these, so given where we currently see the world heading or being, it's, I think, specifically interesting.
Yeah, the ancient Chinese curse, may you live in exciting times.
That's very true. So we are completely living up to that, I believe, currently.
I would like to emphasize a bit that the episode does have not only that we love to discuss on a topic which is even more interesting in fascinating and thrilling times, to say so. The EU AI Act is in force with staged obligation rolling out through 2026. It's reshaping how CX teams deploy models, label AI content, and govern high-risk systems. We have also the aspect that somewhere else on the world, the EU AI Act is not, let's say, respected, or it's more or less neglected in any framework size or approach. And unfortunately, a lot of major cloud providers are coming from one of these very tolerant and privacy-ignoring territories. The sovereign cloud moves, such as the accelerating steps like SAP launches an EU AI cloud and expanded the SAP sovereign cloud in Europe. And there are Coherence, Mistral, and others. And recently, the German BSI started activities in cooperating with Amazon Web Services to build a European-based, safer AWS European Sovereign Cloud, EU-hosted, physically, logically separated, and the first region where they want to start is Brandenburg. Now, knowing that some companies with a blue cloud in the logo and the telecom as partner have started their sovereign clouds approaches ages ago, and they were, let's properly put it, nice wrapping about the same other stuff which you could get in the US, because there were only US citizens allowed. And so this was something like an embassy. You were in German soil, but in American territory. So it didn't make the real sense behind this. Christian, your first thoughts on that fantastic approach of a European Sovereign Cloud, ESC, similar to something which has recently happened in Vienna?
Will happen. Will happen. So not.
Apologies.
But that's the European Song Contest. That's a different story. No, I think the story for me, it's a very nice marketing story. If you say, okay, I build now a data center and I have a European entity that's operating this and owning this and contracting this, for me, it doesn't mean that this is data sovereignty, because still it's a lovely American company, and AWS Europe still rolls up into the American entity. So if you talk about data privacy and data access, that doesn't sound very shielded. They would rather trust something that's truly European. So that's different. So it's nice, yeah, but on the other hand, I think if you, and the interesting story for me, which I see especially over the last 12 months in customer discussions I have, is that customers not necessarily running away or scaring away, but the good story is, based on the current turmoil and the interesting times we live in, Thomas, basically makes people, especially also on a, let's say, decision maker level or C-level, think about the topic. I think that's the important part. And the other thing I think is also important is, for me, data sovereignty does not necessarily mean I now need to put every data and put it somewhere else or whatever, but it's really basically assessing the risk. There's a couple of initiatives that are legally, so like the AI Act is one, but that's still, like, for me, to a large extent, far out. But there are other regulations like NIS, which basically come up and make people think about the data and also the strategies and recover the strategy and say, okay, you need to implement it. And I think that's the good thing. So from my perspective, there's nothing wrong saying, yeah, why not deploy something on AWS or Google Cloud or whatever. But on the other hand, think about the risk and think about sharing and think about where you put data. And the other thing that's also important is not only where the data resides, because you can easily build a data center somewhere that's as old as we can think, because every of the larger cloud providers has the data centers anyway spread out globally. But the other thing that's also interesting, if you ever read like the Data Privacy Act, who has access to these systems, that's quite funny and interesting. So you might have your data easily sitting lovingly in Germany, but the rest of the world has access to it. So that's another quite important topic, I think, to consider where you put your data. So the topic is more like, I believe what I see is spreading it, looking at data and saying, which data do I put there? Where do I have redundancies? Where do I expose myself? Where do I potentially expose critical data? And clearly assessing the risks and distributing them. I think that's way more, that we will not easily basically be able to decouple us from some of the large giants sitting in beautiful North America or the Silicon Valley. I think that's clear and obvious. But some cases make the risk transparent and make people at least think about it. I think that's one of the really good things that is currently happening,
What are the risks? I mean, after all, yes, they are foreign entities, those companies. They are bound by their laws.
Yeah.
But they're also bound by contract. So it means the risk, quote unquote, is limited to state actors. Is that much of a risk?
if you say the risk is governed by a contract, that's a lot of fun. But if it happens, then you can basically go to your lawyers and start negotiating about the contracts, But if you take your personal side, I don't just have one bank account, and I don't have all my bank accounts with one bank. So I spread the risk, And if I look at my personal investment strategy, I wouldn't invest all in one case. I basically spread that as well, And I think that's important.
You have Bitcoin and Ether?
Yes, only crypto, and Trump coin, of course. So what else? The safe haven currently, No, but I think looking that's where investment is going. No, but I think looking at that case, of course, you can look at some dependencies, and there are some political cases where even some, and I think that is possibly something that is more exposed than others is. Public entities and the public sector, While on the private side, you have one responsibility. I think what's for me even more important is from the public side. And if you look at some high-ranking officers who suddenly get shut off from some mail accounts because Microsoft decides or whatever, and somebody says these are risks that are realistically happening. Not that this is utterly necessary, and if somebody turns off my WhatsApp account, okay, what can I do, But mitigating the risk by a strategy and laying out, okay, what happens if one service goes down or one service is no longer provided, just basically balances that. And the other thing I see is still, and I think that's coming back, the pendulum is swinging, is already also customers putting data back on site, and there's nothing wrong. Of course, it depends on the sizes, But when size matters, on the one hand, some customers learned that the cloud is nice, but it's also expensive. So it doesn't make always everything easier, And if you have capacities, that's part of it. So I think the strategy is very good as a company. If you start assessing and dissecting your data and classifying it and basically having a strategy for sovereignty. And for me, this does not mean take everything and now find a European cloud provider and put everything there. That's likely as stupid as saying, okay, I trust everything and put it all into one basket. There are still companies like that, but we both come from an SAP background, but we have seen that sometimes there was the strategy, I put everything into SAP, but in the meantime, also see customers saying, okay, I don't want to put everything to SAP. I want to have a balance, and the same from services. But I think a lot of the things is, and as you say, Ralph, we just had another lovely, based on my Austrian history, a lovely big discussion in Austria for innovation and regulation. So Peter Steinberger with open claw or whatever, basically left Austria and was hired over for loads of money and joined OpenAI, where of course the discussion is where are things heading and where is it going, whatever. But on the other hand, I think it's a very good case, especially for the public sector, to basically lead with some good examples. And if you look at not only the regulations, where I think it's beneficial if there are regulations like an AI Act, because there was one of the discussions, can we keep people like those or do we regulate them or not? But besides regulations, also to lead with example and say, yes, especially as a public organization, you can do that. And this is, from my perspective, especially in the European Union, there's still a lot of lip service. There's a lot of discussion about data sovereignty, whatever. And the next you read is that basically Germany is paying how many billions to Microsoft. So that's a little bit, So, where's the cause, But I think that's something that's probably currently, given the economic and basically complete world situation, is hopefully taking a little bit more shape, bring the awareness to that. Mm-hmm.
I was just trying to focus on one little incident which happened, if I recall right, 2 years ago, where nearly house to house, built back to back, to say so, French data centers burned down, 10 in a row, and a lot of governmental data and business data and private data was lost forever. So fire prevention or a proper risk management in the, let's say, hostess environment is also something you have to check before you go for the lowest or most attractive pricing. Yeah, there you can get after a second thought, and you have had the pain in losing what you had, is a drama. Yeah, so we come here to the drama part. If a fire is destroying everything you put into the cloud where you thought it is safe. Yeah, so you touched the SAP approach already. What does SAP differently, and where might they be a bit more unique than a standard hoster such as Host Europe or Hetzner, or you name, for instance, an Austrian one? I don't know.
Exascale, even though they are Swiss-based, but it's also fine, So there's several, but I trust you know better what SAP does different than even I know, because I'm looking at them, but I've probably less insight than you guys are having. I think the benefit definitely for SAP, at least they are European based. That probably makes it a little bit better from the European side, but still, I'm not into the details really what SAP alone is doing. But as I mentioned, from my perspective, that's not even the most important fact. So that's fine. I think as a trustworthy partner, as you say, Thomas, a lot of also contracts, but it's a risk mitigation. And what you mentioned with the data centers, I'm not sure if this is data sovereignty or simply stupidity if you put everything there and don't do any checks, So that's just the basics, but that's for me the good thing, that people started thinking about it suddenly, That's really because for a long time, completely unaware and nobody cared. So it's a cloud service. I have no idea where it's running from and whatever, as long as I don't have to worry about. This was one of the big things, of course, cloud providers were pitching, saying, don't worry, we take care of everything, And in the meantime, people start thinking about it, And I think some other aids that are coming is also for data portability. That's coming, I think, until the end of 2027 for cloud providers. That's good. And also closer restrictions in terms of proofing service and testing software. There's a lot of I think the regulations, of course, you can always argue that America is too open and the EU is too overregulated, but I believe the regulations are not that bad. So
if you want to be sovereign, why not keeping the data just in-house and just only have the logic somewhere else? I mean, in times of a cloud, it doesn't really matter, right? And storage is cheap.
No, I think that's clearly one, as long as you have a solution that supports that, such a hybrid approach, where you say, okay, stored data is somewhere, and this is the other. But especially we see this also with some of our customers, and we support that, to basically have a replication running on site. So that they say they have basically a second instance running on-prem, So mainly they rely from the performance perspective and also accessibility, because typically on-prem, so the cloud has the benefits that you are typically on backbones. So you're very easy and fast accessible from everywhere. So especially in customer experience and sales and service scenarios, it's an important thing that the system also accessible and fast. So this is a benefit. So this is something typically which is tougher if you run on-prem, but at least keeping a second complete instance that's more or less live backed up on-premise is a good one, And I think the hybrid approach, the fun thing I believe is always when I hear, okay, we need to push customers in a cloud because otherwise they cannot use AI, is something I absolutely don't understand, because you can use every system and plug in AI as a service. That's what we are doing. So we are not developing our own AI models, no intention, So we are basically using them and consuming them. And we can also, the fun thing, if you use other services, use things like have an MCP layer that completely basically anonymizes and scrambles data. Because for some AI analysis, the AI model doesn't need to know what the name of my customer is. And doesn't need to have any private data for no reason, you know. If I basically say I want to have some external service crunching my data, I can use complete garbage data as long as I can decrypt it when I get it back, you know. So why not? That's fine and that's fair. But I think also really, as I mentioned, and what you rightly say, Thomas, is you don't also need to have all the data on-prem. You can also split certain parts, you know, keep some parts outside, some parts inside. And that's from my perspective the important approach. I don't think it currently makes sense to say, oh God, where is the world heading? And everybody's running around like the headless chicken and basically trying to move everything from here to there. So this is also the wrong approach, you know. But taking a step back and saying, where are we? And what is our scenario? How safe is our data? Where is it? Who is operating it? You know, what data do we have? Which is worth more and less protecting? And closer looking at the regulations. And as you said, Ralph, we just acquired a company also really focusing on processes. And of course, like ISO 27000 and NIS are important factors where we now, as part of our portfolio, also consult companies in implementing that, you know. And so that's a good story, putting it forward and saying, yeah, read something like the data protection little sheets you get from your cloud providers. Read it carefully and be prepared to answer some questions. As your own management team, to your own companies and to all your stakeholders. Basically, if you run a management system and say, okay, you have a certain context of your organization and you have stakeholders, then analyze from your data and from your governance and from your complete IT structure what your stakeholders have an interest in that and how you respond to that. That makes sense.
Sorry to interrupt, but you mentioned NIS. What is the role of NIS in that aspect, and how is it influencing, if we focus down to CX, CRM in general, or is it more a hosting guideline?
No, if you talk about NIS2 as something where you say, okay, of course, you need to fall under this directive. So, of course, like if you're the mom and pop shop, it's not relevant, but there's enough, especially larger players, that basically have to consider that. And they consider them relevant for the infrastructure. You need to have a plan. Are you basically alive and keeping services up and running, you know? What's your recovery plans? What's your fallback plans? What are your redundancies? You know, where are they? And you basically owe clear answers. And it's not only because, from my perspective, you can do all of these things just to basically fulfill a guideline. So you just to be compliant. But from my perspective, that's an idiotic approach, because all these guidelines have been written with something in mind. You know, so it makes a lot of sense. And not only to basically be compliant, but also to your own business. Especially with larger ones where we talk about telcos or healthcare or other providers, you know, you should have a clear plan to that, you know. And then, of course, also data security. So talking about telco, just look at the Netherlands currently, you know. So without passing out specific names, what can happen to some 6.5 million subscriber data and customer data, you know?
Ouch.
Big disaster, you know. So it's
a small number. Looking at some banking breaches that have 3-digit millions. So,
it depends on
what
data, you know. So if it's only your name or if there's more to it, you know. And the other thing, it depends if you are one of the 6.5 million.
Identities, passwords, and just some stuff that nobody needs.
The smaller ones, you know, but comes back also data sovereignty is the same. Everybody basically keeps telling people don't use the same password everywhere and mix your passwords and usernames and use unique ones. You know, it's also like for a lot of people it's common sense, but you need to have data breaches, and then for some it's really a bad thing if your thing is stolen and you did not adhere to that. And I think that's from the company and the enterprise perspective, an important one. Don't make those mistakes, So again, what happens during private life happens on the business side as well. Only the magnitude is a little bit bigger. So,
And just comparing those two topics, isn't data sovereignty just a red herring compared to the probably far bigger risk that data breaches or the potential of greater data breaches creates or has?
I wouldn't weigh one versus the other. I think it might be a good story, of course, if you distribute your data a little bit smarter, because then even if one is breached, not everything is breached. Might be a good story. So that might help when you can, But I think you cannot say I do one and not to the other. I think if you're really looking at the world where you're in, you need to address both as a company. So that's. But I would tie them together. I think the story, what you have as controls in place, and where you store your data, and how you look at that, and what you can do in terms of recovery. It's the same issue. You heard about this wonderful data piracy and whatever, where you basically get hackers going in and suddenly killing your complete infrastructure. And I think there's enough of those stories. It's also a part where you say, okay, where do my systems reside? And how am I protected? Of course, it's a difficult part. I agree. Sometimes the cloud providers potentially have even stronger measures than you can have on your own side. That's part of it. So, but it's definitely, for me, it's a complete story. It's a holistic approach that's required. It's not one or the other.
Being in Europe, is that possible at all? I mean, after all, there is a widespread perception that Europe slept itself out of the market.
Yeah, but that's from my perspective, as Europeans, we're always very, very great at playing ourselves down. So this is a European wonder thing, I've lived long enough in the US to know the American approach, where everything is great, and if you scratch on the surface, sometimes it's not like that, And on the other hand, the Europeans always winning.
That's great.
Yes.
Well, lots of lipstick on
playing them down, but I think there's enough. There's just I think what's the story and what's the difference, is the scale we see, But in reality, of course, there are the big ones, and in some cases, we might have missed the boat, because if you take something like, okay, besides Google and Microsoft in the office world, there's not so much really alternatives. There are some, but it's tougher, especially, but not that easy. But if it comes to the wider side of cloud services and cloud providers, as long as you say, no, I don't need the very big ones, there's a lot of mid-sized ones, a wide variety. And especially also if you look at some customers in the mid-market, some of them are, of course, with the large ones, but a lot of them also with more local providers. Ralph, you mentioned some, that are there. There's a wide variety of those, So I don't think we are missing the boat. Maybe some of the smaller ones are not as comfortable or whatever, but I think pricing-wise, differences are not that big. Service-wise, differences are not that big, So there's a lot of choice, but they are not that visible on the market. That's the other thing, because they are, of course, not played that high. And they don't have the billions and billions of valuation and seeing in the Silicon Valley, That makes a difference, yeah.
I mean, there's the other topic. Scale has a correlation, not a causation, but a correlation to pricing. If I can scale higher, I can offer more competitive pricing, which is something that especially the Scottish, the German Scots, the Swabians that Ralph always refers to, are pretty keen on. And looking at the scale of the effort, or the scale of the services that are needed, pricing matters. So is there anybody who can compete with the three big ones in Europe?
If you look at the local ones, I think if you take the total cost of ownership and say, okay, what it takes you to basically operate a solution and on a cloud service, the cost of the cloud service as such for providing the service is anyway a marginal part. So that's like, it's not the big part. And the other thing, also, if you look at like the service providers, if you take an AWS and the services they provide, to a good chunk, the AWS salespersons don't even understand the services they have, and then comparing to what you typically need, it's a very different story. No, you're smiling, It's another good friend of our former provider with the lovely blue logo who recently visited me and now works for AWS and said, yeah, it's exactly the case because they have services up to I don't know what, And so if you say what you realistically need for providing some cloud infrastructure, cloud services on a daily basis, then there are some wonderful, sophisticated niche services that, nice to have them. But on the bread and butter part, I'm saying, okay, you need to basically provide computing power, storage, and some other parts. I think they're very competitive. So the difference you might see, that's true. That's also my experience, is that maybe some things are not that easy to use. So maybe some are a little bit easier on the one hand or the other hand. So some of the smaller ones maybe are a little bit clunkier, But if you do the math and saying, okay, what is the opportunity? What is the cost? What is the risk? That factor of the cost, from my view, is rather small. And even if you compare some, you might end up and be surprised that you even might be at lower cost with some local providers. So I think that's, in the meantime, a big commodity. So
Interesting.
But you might have to be smart and look around a little bit. So it's not, you can always take the obvious one, like years ago, just if you wanted to be saved by IBM or by SAP or whatever, if you're smart, there's enough alternatives out there,
If it were that much of a commodity, why aren't the big 3, 4 hyperscalers, American-based, don't even count the Chinese ones, investing more than Germany's gross GDP this year in data centers? Can't be that much of a commodity.
I think the question is what they're investing versus what they commit versus what the AI bubble is boosting in terms of what they are asking for. So I think that's gonna be interesting, but there's nothing wrong with the commodities. If you check first of all from other commodities make a big chunk of our economy. And so
I don't say anything is wrong with it, but commodity usually says it's very competitive. Prices are down. There's a downward pressure. Means there is a natural neglect by businesses to invest much.
Yeah, but again, if you look at I think a lot of stuff currently, if you look at investments or the supposed investments, that are going into data centers, a lot of it is driven by AI, And it was funny, I think one of the big analyst houses for financial analysts did the analysis on what the AI investment currently does to the US economy and figured out the main companies profited in sitting in Asia, in Korea, So providing the chips. This is where the main growth is coming from and where the main GDP.
There's a reason why NVIDIA is the most expensive company around.
Yes. So that's where a lot is going. But I think there's quite some investment, I think, going on in Europe, but it's not that hyped and not the consolidated. I have no idea if you have even numbers about all the investments in computing power going across Europe. It's part of that that's likely not as obvious, So
it is less money than we have in the US, be true and be advised that is like this. And some European initiatives like Gaia X or something were only, let's say, paperware or vaporware, to say so. There is nothing really happening. But going to the positive advisory part, such as what we had in the comparison private thoughts, business thoughts. What proof would you require before placing sensitive CX data on a European sovereignty cloud? What are, on the other side, your advice to potential customers to check for? Such as what you said, read what you get to read and think about it. What are your core elements to look for?
I think the story, you can rely on certain certifications, which every provider has, And so basically, if somebody has taken that, I think there's not so much of a risk basically going to a mid-sized player and basically putting some data. And so if they have undergone certain certifications and can provide them and have a certain data structure that's redundant,
Okay.
and they can prove that, I think that's fine. But I said, for me, the discussion on the data sovereignty is less about where you put it. And if this is now in Europe or the US or whatever, I think for me, it's more really about the awareness that comes with it and saying, okay, how do you make sure you have a distributing your risk, and you are aware, just the proper risk assessment and saying what happens if, and have a strategy where you basically spread it a little bit, that's important. And I think saying, okay, if you assess this properly as a company, I think that's for me more the data sovereignty, saying how you got the data and where you put it, because to some extent in some areas you will always be tied to some American companies, okay, but that's nothing wrong. I think we should not basically aggregate that and say, okay, it's all bad and oh God, and we can no longer do anything with the Americans. That's foolish and childish. There's nothing wrong about it, but really doing a clearer mapping and a clearer assessing on what your data is and how you want to protect it and how you want to act on it, and also things like security risks and whatever. So putting that together, I think that's the importance of the complete package. And then it's less important to say, like, is there somebody also from AWS in there? Because to some extent, if you rely on other services, you will also do, you will anyway sooner or later end up somewhere in their stack as well. So if you just try to basically plug in some AI services, and sooner or later you will end up on some of their stacks, But that's, from my perspective, that's not necessarily wrong, That's a given. But for me, the importance is really be aware, Open your eyes, assess it, have a strategy in mind. That's the important part, And then it doesn't require a fig leaf that you say, okay, AWS built a data center in Europe. Oh God, what a great idea, And they have some Europeans operating it, which, by the way, is likely anyway. If you really look at who's operating it, they probably somewhere in India or God knows where, So this is like where workforce really sits, And it's the same for SAP. Just look at SAP with operating SAP system running in lovely Germany. So I don't think that's only difference, So.
Well, the matter of the fact is that you need some people where the hardware is.
For sure, but some people running it 24/7, So it's easier to basically follow the sun, and say, okay, somewhere currently the sun shines when it's dark here,
Yeah. So it's a bit hard to maintain the stuff when it breaks if you're a few thousand miles away. So it's
Exactly.
I mean that is, again, this is a red herring that is talked about, and then, well, which passports do those people have? Yes, talking of SAP, they're coming from everywhere for all good reasons. Yeah, and
of course. But that's
of course, this company is not playing that big in the hyperscaler market. Actually, they're getting out of the infrastructure market more and more for all sorts of good and bad reasons, which basically seems to either tout your horn, they are aware of what they are doing and know what they are doing, and have that definition of sovereignty, have a strategy, or they're basically saying, doesn't really matter, right? I don't care. And
that's a tough question, you know.
yeah, well, we need to ask the other Christian.
Having worked long enough for the company.
Yeah, the other Christian, he probably knows better.
Truth probably somewhere in the middle, you know.
Yeah.
It's not black and white on this planet, you know. So there's one on either side. There's certainly a strategy, you know, but on the other hand, there's stock markets and whatever, you know. So.
Yeah, with their
But
own
the
strategy.
similarity is not only in the name, such as Christian K. The first letter of the last name is also similar. So
Yeah.
there is perspective one has to see. Yeah.
Mhm.
As we talked last April in our CM Convo 278 with you, what is the advantage of the fenced garden, or the opportunity, as we said, that local AI services could work also in your own fenced garden, such as if you combine hybrid structures, such as keep some data in the cloud, have your machines in your own premises, and have your own AI model. And you have customers which do some of this.
We are seeing that, yeah. We are seeing that basically some customers start deploying their own AI locally on local instances in their fences, where they can grant also more data access, you know, and are less concerned about the data going out. And I think with the development, that's definitely heading in the right direction, even though in most cases it's still like in some, you see, developing stages. But for me, that's the case. And as I mentioned, I don't see any basically boundaries that I say you need to put your data somewhere to have the benefits of an AI service, you know. In the meantime, the services can reside in many places, you know. And that's
the former Fiducia, which is now Artrovia, or the well-known, internationally known brand of Bosch, they built their GPTs, so they know it is in-house, it's safe. They have a lot of control about what data they are training their engines and their models with. And this is also very important. The fig leaf approach is be in Europe, but how do you control the content which is used for training? If you put there only bullshit in.
If you look at where you have the current large LLMs and AI and whatever services running, you know, none of that runs in Europe. So then you automatically somewhere in the US, you know. So if you read and if you want to basically add and generate some services and use services, that's outside of Europe. But again, it just depends on what data you push there. You know, you can also basically leverage some AI with very well, basically clean data, where basically anonymize it and encrypt, have it run, return it back. There's nothing wrong with it. You know?
If you would be aware of that it would not happen, that you would be an European politician, famous, and you have some power to decide, what, for Christ's sake, would you do to become different in the decision making, and that European sovereignty is not like a kindergarten, or that it is not like a gardening association, but there is some real draft and power behind it? What would be steps you would take?
Really coming from as a European software provider, you know, what basically always gets me upset is the fun fact that European politics is not that active looking at the European software market, you know, because if you look especially at public tenders and whatever, you know, coming with an open source background, we also do. It's always very hard with open source. So they are praying that and preaching that, but they're not doing that, you know. So I think looking more at, especially also Thomas, what you were saying, not playing us down and saying we are so poor and we don't have it, whatever, play the strengths,
Nobody said poor, just slow.
But that sometimes it's not. Sometimes you don't need to be the fastest ones. But even I think there's a lot of small ships around that basically navigate very fast and do a lot of good stuff. Where I think it would be up, and would be my wish at least to there and say, okay, we have a way bigger focus on European software and European services. I think that's also a power the European Union can easily play. And they don't even need to play it by law. They just basically can do this with all their public tenders. Just basically write in you prefer European software, period, or you prefer open source, or you prefer something that's basically operated in a European cloud. Very easy. Just basically put this in some laws for procurement and basically play it through. Because currently a lot of it is voiced, but to a large extent it's lip service. So very easy.
I agree totally, such as you saw probably in some news popping up that one association of open source initiatives, LibreOffice, and another one were blaming the European community and those decision makers which are highly investing in solutions which are not open source, but closed source and American based. That they promote on one end and invest some money in getting sovereignty and getting independency, but on the other end, they utilize all through their organizations American-based software. So LibreOffice was claiming and blaming them, such as, why don't you open up?
I'm not saying that you should basically be preferred just because European, but there's a lot of competitive stuff out there, that definitely can compete. And if you look at the Americas and MAGA, it's clearly America first. If this is right or wrong, it's the other extreme. But something where you say, okay, we should definitely put a focus on saying strengthen the European ecosystem and strengthen the European cloud providers, because otherwise you will sit here and discuss for the next years and years and years and saying, okay, we don't have an offer and we are not compatible and we are not competitive and whatever. But when you don't try and basically try to enforce it and try to push it and give it a better chance, that's tough. And I think the power of the European market is still one of the biggest markets, So that's from the politician side. I think it would be a very good story to basically really do that. And again, there's a lot of discussion, but currently it's a lot of lip service still. So on the one hand, talking is one, but doing is another one, So
that is what's really bothering me, that we have a lot of lip service and what I try to describe politically incorrect, that they on one end act like a kindergarten and on the other end it is like a small association of private gardening clubs. But on the other end, there is the power behind it if they would run it right. Such as the Lidl group is investing heavily, buying Aleph Alpha more or less completely, trying to invest. So those are starting points. And if you go for Scandinavian countries and how strong they are driving their assets, well, there is no longer the Nokia we know, but in Finland you find a lot of power in cloud proficiency, in cloud services, and a lot of technology. I was wondering why.
Nokia is a good word, because the typical Nokia still is half charged, So, so they have a lot of experience with that one, So
okay.
No, but it was it's quite interesting, especially, and also don't underestimate the European power, because if you really look at as you mentioned, Nokia, just take Nokia and Ericsson and say, okay, on the other hand, Europe has a large power on the majority of the communication infrastructure. So we, on the other hand, sit on, as Europeans, on a very long arm, and also on manufacturing side, the same. Semiconductor manufacturing without a small little company in Netherlands would be nowhere, So
which is Chinese owned. Which is Chinese owned, so it's not a Netherlands company. It's a subsidiary.
Yeah, but
Basically a trading post, meanwhile.
you could, yeah, that's another story, but you could easily just follow the wonderful story and imposing some tariffs or whatever, But there's still, there's enough, I think, in the European world that can be strengthened. And from the political side, if you basically drive this stronger, I think this is a good opportunity. Yeah? But you would need the power and say, okay, yes, I want the data sovereignty. And especially from the public side, we basically go ahead and we go to the forefront and we push that. And we push like European clouds, and we push initiatives like open source, and we focus on the European part. I think even so, of course, coming from there, but coming from the closed side, from SAP, the total opposite side, and going to the open source side, I think that's a big opportunity for Europe. And I think especially also if you talk about data security and data sovereignty, it's an important thing.
Yeah. If you are, as you mentioned already, European political sourcing and procurement with some rules and regulations, some frameworks, if you would write a buyer's playbook for customer experience, what would you put inside of it as guiding and advisory?
Of course, to take the best solution, which is ours, but that's a different story,
Completely independent.
I can imagine 2 or 3 other guys who are saying the same.
Okay, aside of this very valid point, what else would you write inside the buyer's guide?
I think the most thing I see just that's one of the prohibitive parts is just that typically these public tenders are written towards 2 or 3 or 4 large ones. Sometimes the requirements they write in are just ridiculous. So I think leave it open and don't require that you basically have gazillions of revenue, because that's in a lot of cases, especially in the open source space, sometimes it's very hard to participate. It's only one, and of course the efforts are large, but that can be managed. But then the selection criteria, some of them are just not focused on the outcome, but focused on some formal factors, and then tailored towards like large organizations. And the other thing, I think I would put a preference in and say, okay, in the scoring, then you say, okay, you need to basically evaluate or prioritize the European clouds and European services. Very easy. And say, okay, it's an important fact for the European Union to basically be on that level, at least have some view on it, and keeping the data sovereignty, and really manifest it and say that must be a key criteria. So
let's stay a little on the political level. If it were important, my theory is the EU would be there, but they aren't.
I think from some extent they are not that far away, because there are initiatives and there are things that are driving that, But as you say, sometimes the European Union is slow, very easy, and not that explicit. So
where are they there? Except from, well, the perception outside of the European Union is that they are great at regulation, and that's it.
Yeah, that's fine. So, but this is, on the other hand, sometimes this is also not bad, Sometimes I'm not opposing to some regulated market as well, But I think, but there are clear, I think, strategies in saying, okay, I think if you look at some recent, basically statements from the European Union, they're trying to basically put a focus on that. And they are trying to put a focus on open source. And there's a certain set of initiatives. There are certain other countries like Switzerland going even further, And so I think if you look at like critical parts, if you just look at like where the Swiss completely kicked out Palantir and others, I think it's especially in some mission critical areas, should be a lot more focus on what they are doing and where they are doing. But I think that's something where you see some states going there and some reality kicking in. Not necessarily customer focus. Yes, it's not CX, but I think in general, at least there is some awareness and there are some initiatives. They are not enforced as much as you would like, but it's a little bit part of the European way of working, So.
As we are running close to the end of our suggested hour, Thomas has done some new stuff in the so-called lightning round, where we shoot, not to be that dramatic as really shooting, but we would ask you question, and we love to have some snappy and speedy answers to that. And I would like to start with one of those, and then Thomas will continue. If there is one sovereignty metric every CX RFP should score this year, which would you like to see in there?
Very good question.
Very good answer. So which to go for? Is it sovereignty? Is it SCORE? Is it C? Is it UAPS, European Union Ops Control? Or what comes to your mind?
Focused is on, I think, how to phrase it. I'm just looking for the proper words that I would find.
No need to be politically correct.
No.
I thought you asked easy questions like, what's your favorite curry or something like that.
Yeah.
I think a reliability index or something like that. They say, okay, how trustworthy and how stable is your data setup in terms of load balance.
Like that one. Yeah. Thomas, pick one, please.
So now you are getting a slow ball. Talking open source versus proprietary software in CRM/CX. Where does open win? Open source. And where should it be avoided?
It should never be avoided. It should be preferred completely. So, no, I think it definitely wins from just the open standards. And if you currently look at market valuations, you see that, especially in the area of AI and the distribution, I think openness and open standards can play an even more important role, because it's less about functionality, it's more about open interfaces. So that's clearly one. And the other thing is price benefits. It's not for free, but if you say, okay, I can build solutions today easier with a very reliable core, I think that's a key benefit. And this is where it's heading to from my perspective.
Where would you go if you were or are asked public LLMs inside customer experience solutions? I would like to hear one safe use case you would advise and one never use case.
One, never upload all your customer data to some LLM or some contract you want to have analyzed or whatever. That's the complete never, Where would I go? I think no preference from my perspective. If you know what you're doing, you can go to anyone. So,
okay.
I think I would just choose, and that's what we have seen. Some are stronger on the one side, some are stronger on the other side. So evaluate that. And the other thing I would say, be safe in the data you play out. And as I say, try to anonymize it and only use it layered in for some processes. So never completely rely on it. But it's also something we are seeing from customers. So it's the whole landscape is getting a little bit more spread out, So I think the CRM is getting down to like more headless consolidated data store where we really have good data and keep it and then build some apps on the side, So that's more it. And I think that value is surfacing more. And I think also playing back to your question a little bit more into the hands of the open source, because sometimes you don't need all the features. a very big player might have, because it's easy to build very specific features on the side as long as you have a very stable and good core, you know?
Okay, as we are past the hour meanwhile, which went quite fast in spite of the seemingly dry topic, which it isn't, but well, too many people think so. Well, thanks, Christian. This was amazing as usual.
It was a pleasure.
Happy to have you back, and of course the invite is open for next time.
Yes, no, I let you have 4 and then I come for the happy birthday party, you know. You should make a big one. You should make a very big canvas for your magic number and invite more people, you know. That would be fun, by the way. So
let's see. In between, let's tune in when we are diving into more CX topics with Cameron Marsh of Nucleus Research, who surely has some new stuff to report about, well, Nucleus reports probably, and how he sees the CX world. Till then, thanks a lot and see you later.
Stay safe.
you.